The letter arrived on a Thursday, slipped beneath the door of Harrow's End like something shameful. Sylvia Croft found it herself, early, before the housekeeper was up, when the kitchen still smelled of last night's wood smoke and the flagstone floor was cold enough to feel through her boots. She stood in the grey morning light of the front hall and read it twice. Then she set it on the small table beside the umbrella stand and went to put the kettle on. There was nothing else to do, Her cousin Frederick had written in his usual way, which was to say he had not really written at all. His solicitor had written, It was the kind of letter designed to feel generous while taking everything. The Croft estate, Harrow's End, and its surrounding 40 acres in the foothills outside of Inverness County had passed to Sylvia upon her father's death 8 months ago, but not cleanly, not without conditions. Grandfather, a man of deeply old-fashioned convictions, had arranged things in the will with the particular cruelty of someone who believed he was being kind. Sylvia could keep the estate, but only if she could demonstrate, before the 1st of November, that it remained a productive and solvent property. If she could not, it passed to the nearest male heir, to Frederick. The letter informed her that Frederick's legal team had identified several irregularities in her management of the tenant ledgers, and intended to raise formal challenges at the county office. It was written very politely. It wished her well. Frederick arrived the following morning without being invited, as he always did, his car gleaming and his coat new. He was her father's nephew, though the word cousin covered it well enough. He had the smooth face of a man who had never gone a day without eating, and the easy smile of someone who had never needed to earn anything. "Sylvie," he said, dropping into the armchair in the front sitting room without waiting to be asked. "You look tired." "I've been up since 5, she said. She did not sit. He picked up a small porcelain figure from the side table, turned it over, set it back down. "You know this doesn't have to be hard. My man has drawn up something quite fair. The house, of course, would go to me, but there'd be a sum, a generous one, and you'd have time to make arrangements. You're young, you could go anywhere." "This is my home, Frederick." He spread his hands, the gesture of a man explaining something to someone slow. "It was your home. It's becoming rather expensive to keep it that way, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. She looked at him steadily, the kind of face that expected a reaction, that fed on visible distress, the way other men fed on flattery. She gave him neither. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Mrs. Finch will see you out." He left, eventually. He always did, But he left the smell of his aftershave in the chair, and the shape of his presence in the room. And Sylvia stood at the window, after he'd gone, and watched his car disappear down the lane and thought very clearly, with no drama at all, "He is going to take this place unless I stop him." The Whitmore trials were an annual event, the kind of thing the county had done, for so long it had calcified into tradition. 3 days of estate-bred working horses, competing in field trials on the grounds of Whitmore Park, ploughing, hauling, cross-country endurance. It was serious business dressed up spectacle, the kind of event that drew the notice of agricultural commissioners, land assessors, local magistrates, of event where the productive standing of an estate could be publicly demonstrated or publicly dismantled. Sylvia had entered Harrow's End twice before, when her father was alive. A Clydesdale gelding, 16 years old, grey going white at the muzzle, named Dort. He had pulled a plough every spring of his life. He was not a trials horse, She entered him anyway. The looks she received when she arrived at Whitmore Park with Dort in a borrowed trailer were the kind that pretend not to be looks at all. She registered them as she led him across the paddock to the check-in area. The way conversation dimmed for a moment, then resumed at a slightly different pitch. Dort walked beside her with his slow, rolling step, his feathered feet lifting and falling with enormous, unconcerned dignity. He was not impressed by Whitmore Park. He had never been impressed by anything except mealtimes and open fields. Frederich was already there. He had entered a horse, too. A handsome black Frisian, well-schooled, clearly expensive, stood with a cluster of county men and their wives near the judge's table. And when he saw Sylvia come through the gate with Dort, he went very still for a moment, and then he smiled. "My God," she heard someone near him say, "is that a Plough horse?" The laughter was not loud. It never was with this kind of person. It was the contained, amused laughter of people who have just been handed confirmation of something they already believed. Sylvia kept her eyes forward. The scene. She had known it would be like this. She had dressed carefully that morning. Her mother's old wool jacket, brown and plain, mended at the left cuff, boots that had seen 10 years of muddy fields. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who worked her own land. She had decided, somewhere between the kettle and the letter on the table, that she would not dress for their approval. She had nothing to prove to their approval. But there was one man she had not accounted for. Arden Whitmore was not what she expected. She had heard his name, of course. Everyone in the county had heard his name, a faction. He had returned from 8 years in Alberta the previous spring to take over the family estate after his father's death, and there was a great deal of opinion about him, most of it from people who had never spoken to him. Successful, difficult, private, those were the words that circulated. He came out from behind the equipment barn as the morning's first trial was being organized, and he moved through the crowd the way certain men do, not aggressively, but with a particular quality of stillness that made space around him without asking for it. He was taller than most of the men there, with the kind of hands that came from actual work, and a face that had spent real time in weather. He was the host of this event, and he wore it like a fact rather than a distinction. The eyes swept the assembled field, the horses, the riders, the equipment, and when his gaze passed over Dort, it stopped. He looked at the horse for a moment, then at Sylvia. Something flickered across his face, not the laughter the others had offered, but something quicker, private, and almost immediately suppressed. He looked away. She told herself it didn't matter. Fiction. She was here for the trials, not for the opinion of the man who owned the grounds she was standing on. The first event was the Crossfield Endurance Circuit, 4 miles of varied terrain across the north end of the Whitmore property, including 2 creek crossings, a stretch of dense bush, and an uphill run through a harvested grain field. The horses carried weighted packs. The judging criteria were stamina, sure-footedness, and completion time. But completion counted for more than speed. Finishing mattered. The entrants who had brought proper trials horses went first, and they were impressive. Trained, athletic animals who moved with the coiled spring energy of horses bred for exactly this kind of work. They covered the open ground beautifully. A few stumbled in the bush. Today, one refused the second creek crossing and had to be led across by hand, which cost significant points. Sylvia went late in the rotation. She had chosen it deliberately. Dort. walked into the starting box with the same expression he brought to everything, which was to say no expression at all, only a calm and comprehensive awareness of his surroundings. He breathed in, breathed out, shifted his weight to look at a bird on a fence post. "Ready when you are," the timekeeper said. Sylvia checked the girth one last time. She nodded. She did not ask Dort to run. She never asked him to run. She asked him to move, and he moved at his ground-covering walk that was deceptive in the way that large things sometimes are. It looked slow, and it was not slow. He did not fight the terrain. He read it. At the first creek crossing, where two of the previous horses had shied and splashed sideways, he stepped down the bank with the methodical certainty of an animal that had crossed 10,000 wet fields and assessed them all carefully. The water came to his chest, yet he waded through it like it was not worth hurrying for. In the bush section, where the narrow track curved and the light broke into pieces between the spruce trees, Dort picked his own line. She trusted him to. She had learned years ago that fighting him for control of his own feet was a waste of both their time. He moved around a fallen birch that had come down since the last trials with a small sidestep that cost them almost nothing. The previous horse had balked at it for 40 seconds. She was not trying to win. She had been honest with herself about that on the drive over. She was trying to demonstrate something quieter and more stubborn. That this horse and this woman and this estate were still standing. Frederich's horse completed the circuit third overall, fast and clean. He came in. Off the field, with the satisfied expression of a man who has just proved something. He rode past her without looking at her directly, which meant he looked at her very deliberately out of the corner of his eye. She did not react. She was watching Dort drink from the water trough, his massive head bent low, patient as geology. The second event was the ploughing trial, and this was where everything changed. It was an old field at the south edge of the property, of ground that looked innocent, until you put a blade in it. The soil was heavy with clay subsoil, and the autumn rains had made it grip. Two of the entered horses, lighter breeds entered by estates trying something new, began to struggle within the first furrow. Their drivers, skilled men, had to ease back, adjust, push less. The clay was pulling back. Dort had been ploughing clay fields since he was 4 years old. He leaned into the collar with the particular intensity of an animal that knows its own purpose. Sylvia walked behind the plough and did almost nothing, because there was almost nothing to do. The furrow opened behind them, clean and even, the turned earth smelling of iron and wet root. Dort's breathing was steady. His pace did not change. When the first headland came up, he turned in a tight, practiced arc and came back down the next row without being asked. The judges were writing things on clipboards. She tried not to watch them. And Whitmore was standing at the field's edge, his arms crossed, watching Dort work. She saw him when she came up on the third headland turn. He was not watching her. He was watching the horse. He had the expression of a man revising something. After the ploughing trial concluded, there was a break before the final equipment haul. Sylvia watered Dort, checked his feet, gave him a handful of oats from the bucket she'd brought. Friedrich materialized at her elbow. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said quietly, pleasantly. "You know that. Half the county is here. The assessor's office has 2 people in the stands. And you've shown up with a pensioner." She continued to pick out Dort's left rear hoof. "He's 16, my point exactly." She set the foot down. She straightened and looked at her cousin. In the months since her father's death, she had had this conversation in a dozen different forms. She had ceased entirely to feel anything during it except a kind of cool, determined distance. "You should go watch the hall," she said. "I believe your horse is in the next heat." He left. She could feel distantly that people nearby had heard, and that their hearing of it was one more small weight added to the pile. She looked at Dort. He looked back at her with his large, mild, completely unconcerned eye. "Right," she said quietly. "Let's go." The equipment hall was the final event. A weighted stone boat dragged across 200 meters of open ground, judged on steadiness of pull and completion. The weight was set heavier than most competitors expected. There was a visible ripple of surprise through the entries when the load was announced. It was, in fact, the load that Sylvia had been calculating Dort against for 2 weeks. He moved the stone boat the way he moved the plough, the way he moved through the creek, the way he moved through all of it, with complete and total commitment to the task in front of him, nothing held back, nothing wasted. His great shoulders bunched and drove. The chain sang tight. The stone boat scraped across the ground, and Dort pulled it as though he were slightly offended by its weight and intended to be done with it. The crowd was quieter than it had been. Just Frisian, elegant and powerful, had completed the haul in a faster time. He would likely place higher on points. Sylvia knew this. She had known it going in. She was not here to beat Friedrich at his own game. She was here to show that Harrow's End could work its own land, that the estate had vitality, that the woman managing it was not a woman in collapse. When Dort crossed the finish line, there was a small, genuine sound from the people watching. Not applause exactly, something more considered. She was leading Dort back toward the trailer when she heard footsteps behind her, purposeful, unhurried, and Arden Whitmore fell into step beside her. She did not stop walking. "Miss Croft," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." He walked a few paces in silence, which she found she did not mind. He was looking at Dort with the same appraising expression he'd had at the ploughing field. "How old is he?" 16. "He moves like he's 10. He moves like he has somewhere to be," she said. "That's different." Something shifted at the edge of his mouth. Not a smile, a shape of one being considered. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him directly for the first time. His expression was straightforward in a way she had not expected, no deflection in it. "When you came through the gate this morning," he said, laughed. He said it simply, the way a man says things he'd rather not have to say, but is committed to saying accurately. Not loudly, but I did, and I had no cause to, and I'm sorry for it. She held his gaze for a moment. She had expected many things today. She had not expected this. "You're the first person to apologize to me in 8 months, she said. "For laughing? Anything." She paused. Dort nudged her shoulder from behind, looking for the oat bucket. She steadied him with a hand on his neck. "But yes, accepted." They stood there a moment, the horse between them, the noise of the grounds settling into the late afternoon quiet. "Your cousin," said, not as a question, "my cousin. I know what he's doing." He said it without ceremony. The way a man says something he has been watching from the outside and has reached a conclusion about. My father had a similar situation with a neighbor years ago. It's a particular kind of campaign. It wears people down. "I'm not worn down." "No," he said. He sounded as though that surprised him less now than it would have this morning. "I can see that." She began walking again, slowly. and he kept pace beside her. The autumn light was going golden and flat across the fields. "I have a land manager," he said. "Gilles. He's been with the estate for 20 years. Today, he knows the county regulations better than the county does. If you'd allow him to look at what your cousin's lawyers have filed, the irregularities they've claimed in your ledgers, I think you'd find the ground under their argument is a great deal thinner than they want you to believe." She stopped. She looked at him. "Why would you do that?" He thought about the question, which she appreciated. He didn't reach for the nearest comfortable answer. "What I watched today was a woman who prepared carefully, executed competently, and asked nobody for anything she hadn't earned." He paused. "And because I watched your cousin spend the entire day looking at you the way people look at someone they've already decided to bury, and I find I don't have much patience for that particular expression." She was quiet for a long moment. Dort breathed beside her, warm and slow. "He has lawyers in Halifax and Toronto, and Nye," she said. "He has time and money, and he intends to use both." "I have lawyers in Halifax and Toronto," Arden said. She looked at him. Something in her chest, some held thing, shifted very slightly. "I'm not offering you charity," he added, and his voice had an evenness to it that she recognized. It was the voice of someone who had thought carefully about how to say something without it being misunderstood. "Listener, I'm offering you an alliance, where you have the knowledge of the land and I have the resources, and together we make your cousin's campaign look like what it is. A nuisance." She looked down at her hands. They were stained from the harness leather, the nails short, the knuckles rough. They were the hands of someone who had been working every day without asking anyone to notice. "All right," she said. "Yes," he nodded once. It was not a triumphant nod. It was the nod of a man who has reached an agreement he intends to keep. The weeks that followed were quiet and efficient. Gilles arrived at Harrow's End on a Tuesday, a compact and methodical man who moved through the estate with a farmer's eye for what was real and what was performance. He and Sylvia walked every field together. He listened more than he talked, which she trusted immediately. What he found was not the neglect Frederick's lawyers had claimed. What he found was a property under deliberate financial pressure, tenant agreements that had been quietly contested, a drainage improvement that had been legally blocked, a small equipment loan that had been interfered with at the bank. "None of this is you," Gilles said, over tea at the kitchen table. "All of this is him." In Halifax, Arden's lawyers met Frederick's with the comprehensive, careful energy of people who have nothing to prove and all the time in the world. Every challenge was answered. Every claimed irregularity was documented, contextualized, refuted. Frederick's legal team, Sylvia was told, had begun to respond more slowly. Arden came to Harrow's End on weekday afternoons, ostensibly to confer with Gilles. He was a quiet presence in the house. He did not try to run things. He sat in the kitchen when Gilles was reviewing the ledgers, and he drank his tea, and sometimes he asked questions, and sometimes he only listened, and gradually, the ostensible reason for his visits became less of a reason and more of an occasion. She learned, in the way you learn things about people, through proximity and small moments rather than conversation, that he had left for Alberta at 23, after a significant disagreement with his father, and had spent nearly a decade running a cattle operation before his father's death made coming back unavoidable. That he missed the plains with a specific and private grief he did not often name. He had a habit of looking at working land. Her fields, her woodlot, her kitchen garden going brown in the autumn cold, with an expression that was not assessment exactly, but something older, something that had to do with the idea of a place lasting. One evening in October, she found him standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the back field where Dort was turned out, visible against the grey dusk, his outline solid and still. "He's remarkable," Arden said without turning around. "He knows every inch of this land," Sylvia said. She stood beside him. Outside, Dort moved slowly along the fence line, following some private logic. "When I was small, my father used to say that a place lives in its animals and its soil. Dort was here before everything else went difficult." Arden was quiet a moment. "Do you believe you'll keep it?" "Yes," she said. She said it without hesitation, which surprised her. She had said it many times in her own head, testing it. This was the first time she had said it to someone and felt it come out whole. "Yes, I believe I will." He looked at her then, not the appraising look she had first received from him at the trials, but something quieter, more direct. "I believe it too," he said. The letter from Frederick's solicitor arrived in late October, 3 weeks before the November deadline. It was, in a sense, the opposite of the first letter. Brief, formal, and total. Frederick Croft was withdrawing his challenges to the estate ledgers. He was relinquishing, by formal agreement, any future claim against Harrow's end in exchange for a modest and mutually agreed settlement. He would not be contesting the will. Sylvia read it in the hallway again, the same table, the same grey morning light. She read it twice. Then she set it down. She sat on the bottom stair for a moment, which she had not done since childhood, and she was aware that her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the particular release of something that had been held for a very long time. Mrs. Finch found her there and brought tea without being asked. Sylvia drank it in silence, looking at nothing in particular. She called, "Arden," she said. "It's done." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll come over." He arrived that afternoon, and they walked the north field together, a long habit now, their breath misting in the cold. Dort followed them along the inside of the fence at a distance of about 30 feet. Not close enough to be in the way, not far enough to lose sight of them. He had developed opinions about these walks. "He withdrew everything," she said. "His lawyers told my solicitor it was no longer cost-effective to pursue." "It wasn't," Arden said. He had his hands in his pockets, his shoulders easy. "It was never going to be, eventually. That was the only question, when he'd recognize it. You spent a significant amount of your lawyer's time on this." "Yes," she looked at him. "I want to understand something," she said. "In the beginning, before you knew. You only saw a woman arrive with an old plough horse and enter a trials competition. She had no real chance of winning. That's what you saw. That's what I saw. And you laughed. And I laughed," he said. He didn't look away. "And then I watched," and what I watched was someone who had prepared very carefully and had a very clear idea of what she was there to prove, and who proved it, quietly, over the course of an entire day, without asking anyone's permission." He paused. "That's not a small thing." She was quiet. "I am not a man who says things he doesn't mean," he said. "I have opinions of my own about Frederick Croft and what he tried to do, and those opinions have nothing to do with you being someone who needed help. They have to do with him being someone who needed stopping." He paused again, and she could hear the precision in him, the same precision she had seen in Gilles. the habit of a man who chooses words carefully because he means them to land correctly. But I would be lying to you if I said this, he gestured slightly, at the field, the house, the space between them, was only about that. She waited. Harrow's End is your place, he said. Anyone who spends an hour here understands that. It's in the way you talk about the soil, and the way the housekeeper watches you, and the way that horse follows you around like you're the most important thing that's happened to him. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. Digton. I've spent the last 8 years on borrowed land, he said, building something that was never quite mine. I came back here because I had to, and I expected to find only obligation. He looked at her. I didn't expect to find this. The light was flat and cold, the kind of October light that makes everything look very clear and very far away at the same time. Dort had stopped along the fence and was watching them with the calm attention of an animal that has no opinion about human conversations but prefers to keep them in view. I'm not asking you to be grateful, Arden said. I'm asking you to consider, if you're willing, that what's happened here over the last few months might be the beginning of something rather than the conclusion. She looked at the house, at the roof, repaired in September, dark and solid against the sky, the kitchen window lit from inside, the gatepost that Gilles' team had reset in the first week of October, upright and plumb for the first time in years. Spent 8 months holding something together, she said. I haven't let myself think beyond November 1st. It's almost November, he said. Yes, she said. She turned and looked at him, a quiet attention in his face, the absence of performance in it. I'm aware. They stood there in the cold for a moment. Neither of them said anything. Dort moved along the fence toward them slowly and pushed his large head over the top rail and rested it near Sylvia's shoulder with a heaviness that managed, somehow, to be gentle. She put her hand on his nose. She looked at Arden. Ask me again in the spring, she said, when the west field is planted and the ledgers are balanced, and I know what this place looks like when it isn't being fought over. He considered this. He nodded. All right, he said. Spring. They turned and walked back toward the house, the horse trailing behind them at his customary distance, the light going low and amber over the fields of Harrow's End, still standing, still whole, hers in every way that counted, and for the first time in a very long time, quietly, privately, possibly not only hers.